Good evening, everyone. There we go. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Horace Anderson, Dean of the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the presentation of the 2025 Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. This evening's ceremony is taking place at Pace University in New York City, and we are joined by environmental law advocates and supporters both in person and virtually from around the world. A special welcome to our online attendees who join us from 6 continents and 24 countries. All of them are here to celebrate the remarkable achievements of our 2025 laureates, Professor John Knox and Dr. David Boyd. At a time when the health of our planet and the dignity of its people are increasingly intertwined, the Elisabeth Haub School of Law is proud to honor these 2 visionary leaders for their pioneering work to define and advance the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Building on years of effort within the United Nations and across civil society, Professors Knox and Boyd have carried forward a shared mission, one grounded in the recognition that protecting the environment is essential to protecting human life and liberty. Through their successive terms as UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, they forged an enduring collaboration that transcends borders and politics, that links communities, links governments and international institutions around a common principle, that the right to a healthy environment belongs to everyone, everywhere. Their work represents more than the contributions of 2 individuals. It symbolizes what can be achieved through sustained dialogue, partnership, and global cooperation. It reminds us that progress in environmental law and diplomacy is rarely the product of a single moment, but rather the result of collaboration across countries, disciplines, and perspectives, all united by a shared sense of purpose. Following tonight's award presentation, we look forward to a panel discussion exploring the future of environmental human rights, how the recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment can drive meaningful change in law, policy, and practice. The Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy recognizes the innovation, skill, and accomplishments of lawyers, diplomats, international civil servants, and other advocates who work to build and maintain the world environmental order. The award is named in honor of Elisabeth Haub, a philanthropist and advocate for strong laws for the conservation of nature, and is today considered the world's most prestigious award in the field of environmental law. We are grateful to the Haub family and to Pace University trustee Liliane Haub, who's a member of the Haub Award jury and has been instrumental in championing its cause. Tonight, we are honored to have several members of the Haub family with us. Christian, grandson of the late Elisabeth Haub, and the next generation of the family, several of their children, Marie Liliane and Anna Sophia, as well as the newest member of the family, Amar. Welcome. Welcome back to Pace. And congratulations to you both. I also want to acknowledge our faculty and members of the distinguished Haub Award jury from across the world who join us this evening in person and online. We thank you for volunteering your time and expertise to recognize exceptional accomplishments in the field of environmental law and diplomacy. It's now my pleasure to introduce Pace University President Marvin Krislov, a lawyer by training who is deeply committed to the work of Haub Law's top-ranked and internationally renowned environmental law program. President Krislov.
Thank you, Horace, and we appreciate the wonderful work you are doing and have done as Dean. I know that the official announcement just recently came out that Horace was reappointed. It was never really a question, but there is a formality in these things. Anyway, please join me in appreciating Dean Horace Anderson. Welcome to Pace University and to the 2025 Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. I'm very proud to be here and to host this gathering in celebration of 2 leaders whose work has advanced environmental protection through law and diplomacy on the world stage. Professors John Knox and Dr. David Boyd have each played a central role in defining and defending the human right to a healthy environment. Through their work as United Nations Special Rapporteurs, they've made that right clearer, stronger, and harder to ignore. This is a little detour. I just saw the play Kyoto at Lincoln Center, and I don't know if you've seen it, but if it is at all accurate, I really admire your tenacity because it is an extraordinary story with a lot of intrigue. So it is accurate, you think? Yeah? Okay. Anyway, I recommend those of you who are interested in it. It's still playing at Lincoln Center. We are honored to be joined tonight by members of the Haub family. I'd like to recognize Lilian, my boss, one of my bosses, and Christiane Haub, along with their children, Marie Lilian and Anna Sophia, as well as her husband, Amar. So welcome all of you. We are also joined this evening by Fabian Platzen of the IWOCA. Where is Fabian? There he is. Okay, thank you very much. Your presence here tonight is deeply meaningful. Your partnership has helped build one of the world's leading environmental law programs, and your continued commitment ensures that this field grows stronger with each generation. The Haub Medal stands alone in its recognition of excellence at the intersection of law and environmental diplomacy. It reflects the values that define PACE, a commitment to scholarship, to engaged citizenship, and to preparing professionals who shape real outcomes. This ceremony comes at an important moment for this university. We are celebrating the 120th anniversary of Pace University and approaching the 50th anniversary of the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. And we're not just getting older, we're getting better and better. These milestones reflect a legacy of progress and forward-looking mission that continues to guide our work. At the Elisabeth Haub School of Law, our faculty, students, and alumni are shaping environmental law and policy in ways that are both innovative and grounded in public service. They are influencing decisions in courtrooms, in communities, and across the globe, and they are doing that work with skill, purpose, and clarity. Thank you to everyone who has brought us together this evening. Thank you to those of you who are participating online, and to our honorees, congratulations. We are so proud and delighted to celebrate your achievements and grateful for the example you have set. Now, I am pleased to welcome Professors Katrina Fisher-Q and Camilla Bustos, who will introduce this year's laureates.
Thank you so much, Marvin. It is a privilege and an honor for the Elisabeth Haub School of Law to serve as the home of the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. And while the recipients of the Haub Award are selected by an independent jury that's comprised of global leaders, diplomats, professors, and scholars in environmental law and policy, the work of the Haub laureates often resonates with the work being done in our environmental law program. And I think there is a particular synergy between the work of this year's laureates, Dr. David Boyd and Professor John Knox, who have championed the recognition of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and our work in the Pace Haub Environmental Law program. My colleagues, Professor Camilla Bustos and Smita Narula, are leading experts on the intersection between human rights and environmental law, making important contributions in the context of climate migration and the right to food. And our faculty, closer to home, champions the recognition of environmental rights at the state level, leading an effort to amend New York State's constitution to recognize a right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. Our environmental law program could not be more honored to join in recognizing the efforts of Dr. Boyd and Professor Knox. I think there's a little bit of starstruck when you all walked in. We understand that the explicit recognition of environmental human rights is necessary but not sufficient, an important step forward that must be further developed and woven into local, national, and international law and practice. We also understand that in some respects, Western legal systems are a Johnny-come-lately, working to enshrine environmental values that other communities around the world, particularly indigenous communities, have long situated at the center of society. Moving forward to improve the protection of environmental human rights by building on your foundational work is a task we embrace at Pace Haub Environmental Law. Just last week, my colleague Achinthi Vathanagay led a delegation of 15 students, alumni, and faculty from our Global Center for Environmental Legal Studies at the 2025 IUCN World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi, where they advocated for motions that they had researched and drafted. Many of these motions were formally adopted and will now become IUCN policy, including a motion offered in response to the recent advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on climate change that exhorts IUCN members to take all appropriate measures to observe and implement the advisory opinion, including, quote, to fulfill the human right to the environment. I'll take a quick moment to recognize Professor David Foreman, the North American representative to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Academy of Environmental Law Governing Board, who joins us en route back to Hawaii from the Congress to honor our laureates tonight. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Professor Camila Bustos, to talk about in some more detail the contributions of this year's laureates. During her remarks, you'll see photos on the screen that capture their dedication, teamwork, and accomplishments. But before I pass the presentation on, I'd like to call your attention to what I think is a particularly powerful photo of Dr. Boyd. This is So this photo was taken, I believe, at the UN immediately following the vote to recognize environmental human rights. And I remember seeing the picture hot on the presses the moment it was taken. I think you sent it out on the Twitter. And it immediately made me think of a book that Dr. Boyd authored in 2015, which is one of my favorite books on environmental law. The book is titled The Optimistic Environmentalist. And it begins with Dr. Boyd explaining, I'm an optimistic environmentalist. Unlike open secret, jumbo shrimp, or working vacation, that's not an oxymoron. The book has on its cover, it's a beautiful picture. It's a diver kind of holding hands, if you could say, with a whale. But I might suggest, Dr. Boyd, that should you issue a new edition of the book, you consider putting the picture of you at the UN on the cover instead. And now my colleague, Professor Camila Bustos.
I am a little shorter, so okay. Thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for being here. So my task for today is to give you a little bit more context for this award. The very notion that a right to a healthy environment should be recognized as a human right under international law may seem obvious today, but this wasn't always the case. We must remember that the human rights and the environmental law communities have historically existed as separate communities of practice, and at times have actually operated in silos from each other. As some of you may remember, there was initially significant resistance from sectors of the human rights community to the recognition of a new right, citing concerns about expanding rights to include the environment. And these concerns often echoed earlier debates about which rights we should prioritize, and historical skepticism, right, that economic, social, and cultural rights, and now environmental rights, should hold the same status as civil and political rights. In addition, I think it's important to contextualize the significance of the right to a healthy environment for communities globally, but especially for Indigenous communities in the Global South. The recognition of environmental rights in Western law has emerged in the context of centuries-long struggles by communities to protect their land and to secure recognition that humans do not exist separate from what we call the environment. In fact, humans are part of the environment, and therefore human rights are deeply interconnected with the well-being of ecosystems and non-human life. This is in part why the work of Professor John Knox and Dr. David Boyd is so groundbreaking. Together, they have helped to crystallize the right to a healthy environment globally and profoundly shaped international environmental law. It is through the work they did as special rapporteurs, Professor Knox from 2012 to 2018, and Dr. Boyd from 2018 to 2024, that there is now a solid legal foundation for environmental rights. Both Professor Knox and Dr. Boyd have also strategically used their platform as special rapporteurs to elevate the voices of Indigenous communities, environmental activists, human rights defenders, and others to secure consensus and support for this development. Professor John Knox, the Henry C. Lorman Professor of International Law at Wake Forest University, served as the first UN independent expert, and later the first Special Rapporteur on human rights and the environment. Professor Knox spent 6 years building the legal foundation for environmental human rights, which culminated in the publication of the Framework Principles on Human Rights and the Environment, a landmark set of guidelines that clarify how existing human rights obligations relate to the protection of the environment. Dr. David Boyd, professor at the University of British Columbia, succeeded Professor Knox as UN Special Rapporteur. And expanding on this legacy, he led a global coalition of governments, UN agencies, and over 1,300 civil society organizations to champion this recognition. Together, our laureates steered a decades-stalled conversation toward success, culminating in the landmark resolutions of the UN Human Rights Council in 2021 and the UN General Assembly in 2022, which again recognized the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. As evidenced by the recent wave of advisory opinions on climate change from the International Court of Justice, as Katie mentioned, or the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and decisions by the European Court of Human Rights and other tribunals, the right to a healthy environment is now an enshrined right in international environmental law. And this is just the beginning. In 2018, the Wake Forest Law Review held a symposium on human rights and the environment. Professor Knox authored an introduction to the symposium's collected works in which he commented before surveying developments in environmental human rights law that, I quote, "Any summary of the present state of a rapidly evolving area of the law will be outdated almost immediately, like a snapshot of an airplane leaving the runway." Today, the momentum and evolution continue as we work to build on the UN's recognition of environmental human rights by developing stronger mechanisms to protect those rights. And for the law students in the room and practitioners, I hope that the work of Professor Knox and Dr. Boyd serve as a reminder. It certainly serves me as a reminder that the law can and does in fact evolve, to sometimes slowly, but it does, to meet the demands of social movements and those at the forefront of the climate crisis. I would now like to invite a representative of the family of pioneering environmentalists, Elisabeth Haub, to the stage to confer this year's award. Please welcome Lilian Haub. Not yet.
Well, it is really an honor again to be here tonight and to present the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy to two remarkable individuals whose work has redefined what it means to protect our planet through the lens of human rights. This award holds deep meaning for our family. It celebrates the innovation and dedication of those strengthening the global environmental order and stands as a living tribute to our grandmother, Elisabeth Haub, whose lifelong vision was to inspire a love of nature, responsible stewardship, and the sustainable use of our planet's resources. A true pioneer, she championed environmental law in Germany as early as 1968, when the northern region of Germany was still heavily polluted by industry. Thanks in part to her early efforts, today the rivers run clear and the air is breathable once again. Her legacy lives on in the work we honor tonight. And I would like to honor Professor Dr. Nicholas Robinson, who was the one who introduced Elisabeth Haub or met Elisabeth Haub. You're probably the only one that has known her. And that's why we are all here. So thank you for all your work that you have been doing. This year's award is especially meaningful through their leadership and collaboration. Professor John Knox and Dr. David Boyd have turned a powerful idea into a recognized international right. The right to clean air, safe water, and a healthy planet for all. Their achievement marks a milestone in international law and a major step forward for humanity, linking environmental protection directly to human dignity, equality, and life itself. Professor Knox and Dr. Boyd now join the distinguished ranks of visionaries who have received the Haub Award over the past 46 years. Individuals whose work has illuminated the often under-recognized efforts to safeguard our shared environment and advance justice for generations to come. The progress we celebrate tonight will shape the world our children and grandchildren inherit. That is why I'm especially delighted to invite our daughters, Marilee, please come to the podium, Anna Sophia, and her husband, Amar, and of course, my darling husband, Christian, who is the grandson of Elisabeth, to join me in presenting this award. The next generation embodies the hope that these achievements will continue to guide us to a more just, sustainable, and hopefully peaceful world. On behalf of the Haub family, please join me in congratulating our 2025 laureates, Professor John Knox and Dr. David Boyd, for their extraordinary contributions to advancing environmental, human rights, and securing a healthy planet again for generations to come. Please join us at the podium so we can award you. This one here. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So our laureates should not rest just yet. We have a little bit more work to do this evening. I'm now going to present our panel discussion moderated by Professor Smita Narula, and our laureates, Professor Knox and Dr. Boyd, will be joined by Ambassador Maritza Chan Valverde for a discussion on how we take this important work and actualize it in law policy and practice. So Professor Narula and our panelists.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to take Dean Anderson's lead and say that again. Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to have you all with us this evening. My name is Smita Narula. I'm the Haub Distinguished Professor of International Law here at Haub Law School and co-director of our Global Center for Environmental Legal Studies. What an honor it is to celebrate the remarkable achievements of our distinguished laureates this evening. This year's award carries even deeper meaning as it is presented by so many members of the Haub family and a growing family. Congratulations to you. Through their presence and their actions, they embody and reaffirm the Haub family's enduring multi-generational commitment to protecting our environment. We also celebrate this achievements in the presence of so many members of our community, including so many of my international environmental law students. Thank you so much for coming all the way downtown. But also in the presence of many individuals who have also worked tirelessly to achieve the adoption of this universal recognition through the resolution, but also in their day-to-day work who work so hard to create the right to a healthy environment as a reality, particularly for communities that are most marginalized by environmental and human rights harms. This triumph we celebrate tonight. We celebrate our laureates, but we are also celebrating the triumph of environmental law and diplomacy that resulted in the unanimous adoption of the UN General Assembly resolution on the right to a healthy environment in 2022. This triumph would not have been possible, however, without the efforts of Ambassador Maritza Chan Valverde. Ambassador Chan is permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations and the first Costa Rican woman to hold this position since Costa Rica signed the UN Charter in 1945. She brings to this role more than 25 years of professional experience at the highest political levels. She has represented Costa Rica before the United States and in multilateral organizations in Washington, D.C. and in New York. In July 2022, Costa Rica, represented by Ambassador Chan, introduced and successfully guided through the UN General Assembly the landmark resolution recognizing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, a moment that itself represented years of patient diplomacy, vision, and bridge building among UN member states. She worked tirelessly to forge consensus among countries across every region, and the result, 161 votes in favor, including the United States. None opposed and only 8 abstentions, representing a resounding affirmation that the health of the planet is inseparable from the health and dignity of humankind. Ambassador Chan continues to embody that vision today. She champions Costa Rica's global role as a bridge builder for environmental diplomacy, advancing climate justice, protecting environmental defenders, and amplifying the voices of small and climate vulnerable states. In 2025, she was elected Vice President of UN ECOSOC with responsibility for the humanitarian affairs segment. She also served as Vice President of the Bureau of the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. It also bears saying that she is an expert in international peace and security and a leading advocate for governance frameworks for artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. I think it's safe to say that she has her fingers on the most pressing issues of our time and is remarkably leading the challenge in pushing us through the 21st century. It is a true honor to welcome you tonight, Ambassador Chan, alongside Professors John Knox and David Boyd, to our discussion on advancing the right to a healthy environment. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. I'll begin with sort of an open-ended question. I think for all of us, the universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment was a moment of hope and affirmation. We all saw the photo of the fists up in the air, and I think we all did it ourselves when it happened. But I think for each of you, it must have carried a very unique personal meaning, given the years of dedication and work that you have put into making this result a reality. Can you share what that moment meant to you and how you think universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment can help tackle the interconnected crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution?
Go for it.
Go first. All right, I'll go first. And let me start by saying this. Thank you to the Haub family for this extraordinary honor. Thank you to the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. Thank you to the jury, and thank you to Pace University. John and I discussed this earlier. You know, we would really love to be able to thank each and every one of the hundreds of amazing people, many of whom are in this room, who contributed to this extraordinary legal accomplishment. We could actually filibuster and avoid all of Professor Narula's difficult questions by naming all of those names, but we don't really have the time to do that, and we apologize. But it was an incredible team effort, and really the honor of a lifetime to work with all of you and all of the people who aren't here in the room. Having said that, I mean, some people have mentioned civil society organizations, indigenous people, local communities, social movements, trade unions, academics, human rights defenders, scholars, lawyers, judges, government officials, and last but not least, diplomats, extraordinary diplomats, and particularly from what's called the core group, the 5 nations that advanced this at the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, led by Costa Rica, the Maldives, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland. To me, these resolutions proved that dreams can come true, that a group of Davids and Davitas can conquer Goliaths and make the world a better place. Human rights have this incredible transformative power. Human rights brought about the abolition of slavery. Human rights brought about the end of apartheid. Human rights have helped advance women's right to equality, the rights of indigenous people, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ+ persons. And, you know, it's not a magic wand or a silver bullet, but it has this power, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment can help ensure that everyone everywhere, as the Dean said, has the right to breathe clean air, has access to safe and sufficient water and adequate sanitation, and healthy and sustainably produced food. The right to a healthy environment can ensure that everyone everywhere lives in a non-toxic environment, a world where biodiversity and ecosystems recover and flourish, and where there's a safe, healthy climate. And the beauty of the right to a healthy environment is that it changes these from options that governments can consider to obligations that governments must fulfill. And so it's just been the honor of a lifetime to serve in this role with people like John, people like the ambassador, and I'm just eternally grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
So I've been lucky in a lot of ways, none more so than to serve my time in the mandate before David. And so they didn't have his eloquence to compare my eloquence to. And now finally the luck has run out. So I apologize for what you're about to hear, because it does, I can't ever really keep up with David's just beautiful way of putting things. I mean, obviously I agree with everything he said. I think one thing that we're both a little bit uncomfortable about, frankly, is being recognized for the right to a healthy environment when so many people over so long worked on it. But now that you've given us the award and you can't take it back, I think we're more comfortable admitting and really emphasizing just what a group project this was. And when we talked about this beforehand, we really had a hard time not naming some of the names of people who worked on this most. And we just decided that once we started, it would be really hard to stop. And so I don't want to suggest that in any way, by not naming people by name, we don't appreciate very much all that they did to get us to this point. Your question, Smita, about what it kind of meant for me to be there at the time, I found myself thinking a lot about the generations of people who worked on this issue. It was almost exactly 50 years, almost to the day, since the Stockholm Declaration had been adopted in 1972. The Stockholm Declaration is, of course, most of the people in this room know, was the first time that the international community had come together to really emphasize the importance of protecting the international environment. And the Stockholm Declaration included a strong recognition of the link between human rights and the environment. And yet it took 50 years for the UN to kind of close that circle that had begun then to really say, without any kind of caveats or hesitations, that there is in fact a right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We talk a lot about kind of linking hands with future generations, but I found myself thinking about kind of the way that we were honoring, in a sense, past generations who have worked on this, and that was it was important that people be recognized for all that they had done to get us to this point, that we were essentially standing there, we were there at that moment, able to put our fists in the air because of all of the things that people had done to get us to that point. So I completely agree with David. I think it was a transformational moment. I just briefly, I often say that I spent my first 6 years on, my 6 years in the mandate talking about greening human rights, all the ways in which other human rights can be brought to bear on environmental protection. And it always takes a little bit of time to explain how the right to life and the right to health and all of these other rights kind of come together to create this tapestry that then supports environmental protection. The right to a healthy environment just does that in a phrase. And it's a phrase that people understand. And it's a phrase that people can, as David so eloquently put it, put to work. And I think that's in some ways the culmination of, again, 50 years of effort to get to that point. I think it's both a capstone and also a cornerstone for the next 50 years of work to actually make the right to a healthy environment a reality for people all around the world.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to continue working with PACE and seeing some of my interns here with us today and some of my former interns. We really appreciate the quality of your students. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this award and to be in the presence of two of the people that I consider giants, even though they don't like to be called like that. For me, personally, it was the first time that I introduced a major initiative at the United Nations. It was right after I was, just days before, actually, I was appointed permanent representative. For me, it represented the power of small states. It reconfirmed the notion that states can be small by significant, empowered, and empowering. And in a world that is so polarized, small states are the core, the majority of the membership of the UN. And we have demonstrated not only that we'll build bridges, but we are honest brokers. And when we are together, we are able to rescue and put resolutions into motion when some will doubt. And I say this because when the process started in Geneva, there was a moment that the core group thought that it was not the right time. And it was the small island Pacific, the small islands, the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Vanuatu. We said, no, don't do that. We do not have the luxury of time. So for those who in the 4 days that the 72 hours that took for the adoption and how we were able to galvanize that support for all of them, to Catalina de Bandas, to Christian Guillermet, to Mario Vega, to Mariana Castro, to Daniel Zavala, to Rodrigo Carazo, and for me, who was at the end of a long chain of people and Costa Rican diplomats who share this deep ethos in believing that we can leave this world better than we found it. Thank you.
I wanted to start with you, Professor Knox, and come to you because I think your remarks really, they remind me of remarks that another panelist made on a panel I was on during Climate Week discussing climate litigation, where he said, you need to be measuring progress, not in days, months, or even years, but decades, and to understand that you're part of a decades-long revolution that's taking place. Part of that revolution around the right to a healthy environment is the is shifting consciousness on what we are owed as human beings, and what we can claim rights to, and telling a story about human rights. To me, one of the remarkable moments of that storytelling was your 2018 Framework Principles on Human Rights and the Environment, which represented the culmination of your 16-year mandate and really represented the first comprehensive articulation of states' obligations to safeguard the environment as a matter of human rights law. And in doing so, you gave us all a language with which to assert rights and the legal backing to do so with sort of the confidence that this was already woven into our collective imaginations as an international community, even if the word environment had not been named. Looking back at those set of principles now, can you tell us, as we move forward, which of those principles do you believe will prove most critical and which remain most challenging to realize as we move to the process of implementing the right?
So just for those of you who haven't looked recently at your copy of the framework principles, they're under your chairs, I think. But so the idea is that they summarized what human rights bodies had already been saying about how human rights, again, such as the right to life, the right to health, the right to private and family life, and so forth, already were requiring governments, already should have been requiring states to do. And so a lot of what I did was simply restate and summarize these conclusions that had already been reached by international human rights bodies. So they cover procedural obligations, such as the right of access to information, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, substantive obligations, which David especially really expanded on in his own time. I'm just going to emphasize one in particular that I think in some ways is the thread that runs throughout all of them, which is the right to non-discrimination in the environmental context. The more I worked on these issues, the more I decided that what really was going on here is, and what human rights could bring to bear on this issue, is the fundamental injustice that pervades so much environmental degradation. The most marginalized people and communities in the world have to bear disproportionately over and over again the burdens of environmental harm. These are people who are already and communities who are already marginalized because of their race and ethnicity, because of their gender, because they're indigenous peoples, for a variety of other reasons. But when David and I traveled throughout the world and met with different communities, that's what came up over and over again, is that the people who are asked to bear the burden for environmental harm, it's not the result of some kind of like, well, we have to have a certain amount of economic development, so we as a society will accept a certain amount of environmental harm. No, over and over again, it's the idea is we're going to have economic benefits for some in our community, and we're going to buy that at the expense of environmental burdens on others. David, to give a shout out to, I think, one of his absolute best reports, which you really should all read, on sacrifice zones, areas that were essentially have become unlivable because the environmental burdens are so great. And yet I think we don't think of the relationship between human rights and the environment enough this way. So when you ask me which principle I would like to see most become more of our kind of thread of discussion on this, I would really like it to be that, this sense that when you see environmental harm, often what you're really seeing is a human rights abuse. When you're seeing environmental harm, you're seeing discrimination against the people who are suffering that harm.
I so appreciate that. And also to really be able to bring the language of human rights to the United States, where we also often talk about these issues as environmental racism or environmental injustices, but to ground it in a human rights framework, as Professor Rebecca Bratsby's, who's here, I just want to give a shout out, does often, is very powerful. Dr. Boyd, I want to turn to you now. Throughout your tenure as Special Rapporteur, you have made it a point to highlight very concrete examples of how states' recognition of the right to a healthy environment was already producing measurable impacts, such as cleaner air and water and stronger environmental laws. Because as you've said, and as my colleague said, there's a, international law came sort of late to the party, right? This has been recognized in so many constitutions and framework law. What guided your decision to center your advocacy on these real world examples? And how did that approach help build the global momentum that ultimately led to the UNGA's resolution?
Thank you for that question, Smita. And I have to actually give John credit because John did a report on good practices, which I really enjoyed. And I thought, well, I'll just copy that. And there's an Arab proverb that I like, which is when you shoot an arrow of truth, dip the point in honey. And I think, so, I wrote a good practices report that was presented to the Human Rights Council in 2020, over 500 good practices from more than 150 nations. And my amazing team at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights sent a letter to all of those countries, more than 150 countries, specifying the paragraphs in which their good practices were identified. And it really did set the tone. And, in the ensuing interactive dialogue in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, there was about 100 states that commented on the report, asked questions about the report, really a huge level of interest. And so in my ensuing reports, I always included appendices of good practices. My country reports, I put in good practices. And I really think that kind of, in the world of human rights, we're so used to the discourse being dominated by criticism and bad news. It kind of turned the tables around on the right to a healthy environment. And so for countries that were champions, it really kind of solidified their support. For countries on the fence, I think it nudged them towards supporting the resolutions. And for those countries that were opponents who said the right didn't exist or duplicated other human rights or was ineffective, it kind of blunted that criticism. So I think, thanks to John's wisdom, it turned out to be a pretty good strategy for moving things forward.
I think you can see that this has been a very collaborative partnership throughout. I also want to say, Dr. Boyd, that I assigned one of your videos, which came on. I've watched a lot of the videos, but one of the videos to my students who are here to watch before coming, which you actually created during COVID. It was a Zoom video and long before the adoption, where you were talking about these examples, so you can quiz them on it during the reception. But it's that same idea of storytelling, right? So how do we actually get people to realize not only is this a human right, but it is a working right, that it is leading to successes. So important. Ambassador Chan, you stood at the helm of an incredible feat of environmental diplomacy, turning years of advocacy and legal foundation building into a political reality. I was hoping you could take us behind the scenes a little bit of the negotiations and tell us what you think made it possible to achieve such overwhelming support in a world that is so often divided on environmental and human rights issues. How did you bring together such diverse regions and interests around a shared sense of purpose?
Oh, thank you very much for that question. But actually, this is a story in two acts. There's one act in Geneva and the second one in New York. I will walk you briefly on the act on Geneva, Act 1, but for that, there's an amazing paper by Mark Lemon that describes everything that happened, and I read it thoroughly, and I highly recommend that paper to you. So let me tell you, 4 days before the adoption, the odds were against us. Sponsorship was dangerous law. The United States was actually lobbying against us. The United Kingdom opposed us. Russia promised hostile amendments. And one of the members of the core group said, let's withdraw, let's try again next year. And this is when the Pacific Island states, Maldives, Tuvalu, and the Marshall Islands said, waiting means disappearing, delay isn't diplomatic, prudence, delay is extinction. And at that moment, my delegation in Geneva was in charge of breaking the deadlock. That meant addressing certain concerns with these countries, with Brazil, India, China, with France, with Egypt, with UK and the US. And with the Russian amendments, we did not take them on board. One thing that I have to say is that the factor that made a difference was the role of Catalina de Bandas as the ambassador of Costa Rica in Geneva. Because when she came with a clear mandate that we should push forward to the adoption of the clean and healthy environment to the Human Rights Council, even though we were not members, she sat down with you two and Mark Lemon, and they didn't prepare a concept paper. They drafted the resolution. This means that we can work collaboratively, that states do not have the sole domain in what the humanity should do, and that we can do this together. What happened on October 8th, 43 members in favor, 0 against, 4 abstentions. Russia, China, India, and Japan, remember those 4. 78 countries co-sponsored the resolution, but we won the first battle. The second act, this is New York. In New York, there are not 47 members, there are 193. We had 9 months to work, but because the vote was supposed to be in July or before the end of the Maldives presidency of the General Assembly. And this is when the stars align. So over the 9 months that we had, first, we organized expert seminars addressing specific concerns. 2, we conducted bilateral meetings with certain capitals. 3, we gained momentum at Stockholm 15 that was happening in June 2022. And 4, we held 4 rounds of informal consultations based on the 0 draft that was very, very close to the one we had in Geneva. That helped us because we addressed some of the concerns of those states before. However, in New York, every objection from Geneva emerged. Legal objections, development objections, litigation fears. We also heard about the need or demand to include common but differentiated responsibilities. And one country wanted us to include unilateral coercive measures. How we addressed these objections? We strengthened language on international cooperation, state sovereignty, and the right to development. On the legal objections, we stood firm. Over 150 member states have already recognized the right domestically. 8 regional treaties included, and the evidence of customary international law was overwhelming. On coercive measures, we did not include Iran's proposed language, and they had an explanation about. Most importantly, we listened. Countries that felt heard, even if they don't get everything, they're more likely to support the text. And on this point, I want to say that process matters so much that the outcomes that we have been able to get by consensus at the General Assembly in the last 6-8 months are examples of processes done with surgical precision. And what happened on that date? India went from abstention to support. Japan joined consensus. The United States voted in favor. The first new right they have supported in 50 years. So we have universal recognitions. 170 member states sponsored the resolution. We divided the membership among ourselves, and the WhatsApp diplomacy works. It's true. 161 member states voted yes. 0 voted no. 8 abstentions. From 78 co-sponsors in Geneva to 117 in New York. From 43 to 161. Momentum became transformation. Wow.
I think to all the future environmental diplomats in the room, learn to use WhatsApp. It's a very, very handy. So we just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions to the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to all of you and your questions, including questions online. So here are my combined questions. I'm wondering what progress you have all seen since the adoption of the resolution, and whether you think the recent wave of advisory opinions on states' obligations to address climate change are giving extra or, motivation for others to do this work or a legal boost. And then my last question that is that even as much of the world embraces the right to a healthy environment, there are also countries that are moving in the opposite direction. I'm not naming names. That are weakening environmental protections or even questioning the very idea of environmental and human rights. What would you say to the students who are here tonight and those joining us online, many of them future environmental lawyers, about how to persevere in this struggle and to find hope and purpose even when progress feels uncertain?
Oh, man, those are tough questions individually, but collectively, wow, that's a real massive task. Look, it's been 3 months and 3 years since the General Assembly resolution, and the progress that's been made in terms of recognizing the right to a healthy environment in law has been nothing short of extraordinary. You have now, since the resolution, 10 more countries that have either changed their constitution, like Pakistan, changed their legislation, like Canada, or signed regional treaties that include the right, like Belize. So now we're up to 165 out of 193 UN member states that recognize the right in law. In 2022, parties to the Convention on Biodiversity, for the first time, put a human rights at the heart of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including specifically the right to a healthy environment. At the climate COPs 27 and 28, including the global stocktake, the right to a healthy environment was included in the outcome documents. In the Bonn Declaration on a planet free from harm from chemicals and waste, the right to a healthy environment was included. We've had the advisory opinions from the Inter-American Court and the International Court of Justice that have further elevated the status of the right to a healthy environment at international law. We've had general comments from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and the UN Committee on Economic and Social Cultural Rights, the first time those committees have recognized the right to a healthy environment, and courts around the world. So this is an extraordinary amount of progress that has taken place in terms of the law. But Professor Narula, you also talked about real world impacts. And I think for all of us, that's what drives us. We want the right to a healthy environment, not only to be, those beautiful words on paper, but impacting people's lives. And I have some pretty good news to report there as well. I could actually take a lot of time, but I know time is short. So in Kuke, a small remote community in the Kalahari Desert, people have access to safe drinking water because of the right to a healthy environment. In Quintero Puchuncaví in Chile, one of the sacrifice zones that was profiled in my report, they have closed down coal-fired power plants. They have closed down an antiquated metal smelter. The government of Chile has passed stronger air quality standards, and people are breathing clean air as a result. In France, people use the right to a healthy environment to block the approval of a pesticide that would have killed bees and other pollinators. In Costa Rica, the right was used to protect an endangered species of hammerhead sharks. In Hawaii, a group of youth used their right to a healthy environment to become the overlords of the state's transportation strategy, guiding it towards renewable energy, equity, and public transportation. In Ecuador and Panama, people used the right to a healthy environment to block incredibly destructive mining projects. I could go on and on. There's so many examples just in the past 3 years of this right really making a difference. In La Oroya, Peru, and Owino Uhuru, Kenya, people are being compensated, financially compensated for their exposure to lead by poorly regulated industrial facilities. And if I may just share one personal story, I've been working as an environmental lawyer for about 15 years. In 2007, mostly protecting in Canada, I'm Canadian, protecting nature and endangered species. And in 2007, I visited a small indigenous community called the Aamjiwnaang First Nation near Sarnia, Ontario, a small community that is surrounded by literally dozens of major industrial polluters, petrochemical facilities, oil refineries, a styrene manufacturing plant. It was, for me, I spent a few hours on the reserve with two members of the First Nation. By the end of the day, I had a sore throat, scratchy eyes, a terrible headache, and I was just struck dumb by the fact that people could live in those conditions in a country like Canada. They have air raid sirens in Aamjiwnaang that when the air raid siren goes, it means shelter in place. Go into your home or your office and don't come out until you've got the all clear signal on a text. And that changed the trajectory of my legal career to focus on the right to a healthy environment. Canada, to my great embarrassment, for many years opposed United Nations recognition of the right to a healthy environment. But eventually, through persuasion of people like John, the ambassador, and myself, Canada came around, and Canada voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution in 2022. In 2023, we amended our primary pollution law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, to legally enshrine for all Canadians the right to a healthy environment. And last year, in 2024, Canada's Environment Minister announced a new regulation requiring industrial facilities in Sarnia, Ontario, to dramatically reduce their emissions of cancer-causing benzene. And so there is just the most compelling example possible of how the right to a healthy environment can be harnessed to change people's lives. The Aamjiwnaang people have been seen for the first time in their lifetimes. They've been heard, and they are now breathing cleaner air because of the right to a healthy environment. So.
So I just want to acknowledge what you said. I think in the sense that I think this is a grim moment in a lot of ways. And so if you're starting off your career now, it would be really easy to get discouraged about what lies ahead for you. And I just want to emphasize what David said, that even in the middle of a grim moment, there are just so many signs to hope and to persevere. This is not a short-term struggle, right? This struggle to protect human rights and the environment is going to go on for all of our lifetimes. And along the way, there will be setbacks, but there will also be a lot of victories. And if you're looking for inspiration, I'm just going to give you one brief story. So we've already referred a couple of times to the 2025 International Court of Justice opinion. That opinion started literally with a group of students in the South Pacific in an environmental law class, an international environmental law class, asking themselves, well, what can we actually do to try and improve the threats, try and address the threats that we're facing? They decided to start a campaign to take a case to the International Court of Justice, and they succeeded. 4 years later, in 2023, the General Assembly voted unanimously by consensus to refer this case to the International Court of Justice. And just in July, the International Court of Justice issued a unanimous decision that said basically states do have obligations under a whole set of sources of international law, but including human rights law, to protect the environment. And they said, I think even as optimistic as we are on this panel, I think we were pleasantly surprised by the strength of the opinion, and in particular, the strength of its endorsement of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which the ICJ said is part of international law now. That's a remarkable achievement. And again, this was a project that lots and lots of people contributed to, that part of it started from a group of students sitting in a classroom and talking to each other. A lot of them were on Zoom and just thinking about what they could do. So I guess I would say there's lots of sources of inspiration out there. Look for them and then be inspired. Yes.
Thanks. To add to what you just said, after the adoption of the right, Vanuatu came to us and asked us, we're thinking of doing this, the ICJ advisory opinion. So we suggested, let's create a cross-regional group of states. This is how things are done at the UN. A very core group of states. Make sure that the core group is solid, that you will not have people doubting that when they are under pressure.
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, pick your allies well. And I want to have a reflection for the young students who are here. The threats are different in Guatemala than in Kiribati, in Kenya than in Bangladesh, but the principle is the same. Everyone has a right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and we recognize that right as universal. Make it protect the Honduran family that shouldn't have to migrate because climate change destroyed their farm. The Congolese community who should have clean water, not rivers poisoning by mining. The Indian child who should breathe clean air, not develop asthma at age 5. the Brazilian indigenous elder who should pass traditional knowledge to grandchildren on traditional lands, the Kenyan farmer whose livestock should have water, not die from drought. In Kenya, 85% of a woman's energy is used to fetch water. Persevere. Make it save lives everywhere. Make it protect communities everywhere. Make it transform systems everywhere. That's your work. That's your calling. Persevere, and please leave this world better than we found it. I thank you.
I think we have time for a few questions. I'm actually going to take several questions, and then if you could please also identify yourself. There's a microphone that I think is available and coming around. Do we see? All right, I see Professor Bradsby's, I see Laura from my class, and Dean Anderson. I will call on. Laura, go ahead.
I get to go first. My name is Laura O'Callahan. I'm a law student, third year with the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. And I guess my question is, I appreciate your comments on all of the progress that has been made. And I'm curious about your opinion on what are sort of the next steps or what you hope to see next.
Thank you, Professor Bradsby.
Thanks. I think my question is very similar. There are so many priorities, right? But if you had to identify what you see as the priority to pick to fight for and advance now, what would that be?
Thank you. And Dean Anderson.
My question is also similar. So we heard from the ambassador about the power of small states. We heard from Professor Bustos about how indigenous communities and global South states have long oriented themselves around protecting the planet in the way that they order their society. So I wonder, as we think about next steps, are there any specific lessons we can learn from those communities in terms of structures?
Thank you. Anyone who wants to speak?
I've been pushing it off on David to start first, so he's pushing it back on me this time, which is totally fair. Let's see. So in terms of next steps, I'm going to combine that with what I think the biggest kind of current problem is. I mean, honestly, it's hard to pick just one because there are a lot. It's, you often hear references to the triple environmental crisis of climate, biodiversity loss, and toxics and pollution. I have to say, though, I do feel like on climate, I don't think people fully realize just how close we are to the end of the runway on this, in a sense. We are just not doing the things we have to do to avoid just major problems. We are really running out of time on that. And so I'm going to combine that with the question that Laura asked and say, I would really like to see a lot more effective climate litigation in places around the world where that's a possibility. I think there has been, I mean, we have one of the people in our audience here is Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, who has written several books on this and championed litigation himself. And I think we know both the benefits and the limits of that kind of litigation. But I do think one thing that the ICJ opinion, the Inter-American Court advisory opinion can do is to kind of supercharge that kind of litigation, because we just need a lot more of it, both at the local, the national, and the regional level. I'm not going to say that's going to solve all the problems by themselves, but I do think the good news about climate is we really have solved a lot of the technical problems, and now it's a question more of political will. And I think litigation and advocacy campaigns can help to change the political dynamic, and they really need to do that.
Thank you.
To your question, I'm concerned about UN80. The UN is undergoing transformative period. We are assessing how we're doing things, from what is our mandate to what is the UN doing at the local level. And I think that we need to create a very hard and strong group of states, not only from, cross-regional, that make sure that their concerns when it comes to the environment, human rights, peace and security, climate, the triple nexus continue to be relevant for the organization. I'm very concerned about what UNAIDS can do if we are not paying enough attention. And it means that there are limited resources. And with limited resources, we need more coherence. We need to maximize existing tools, coordinate effectively, not only with groups, but among us, and maintain the political will that without political will, small delegations will be left out of the conversation of UNAIDS and what's happening to the United Nations from this moment to the next year, which will go under tremendous funding problems. So the UN is speaking what it's going to do and what it's not going to do. Only in humanitarian crisis, we have 300 million people in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Only 119 will get, because they're not funding to reach the ones who need it the most. So it's the math, it's an impossible math, but it is happening, and especially to the most vulnerable countries, the ones that need us the most. And we are now making decisions on who lives and who dies. UNAIDS is part of that process, and that is part of what is called a humanitarian reset. I haven't heard a thing about how we can maintain these new advances alive and mainstream into what the UN is doing. So this is the next step for us.
Well, I would agree with everything that John and Ambassador Chan have said. And I would say, we still have some work to do on the legal side. There's 28 nations that don't yet recognize this right at the domestic level. Half of those nations are small island states. I'm working with a group of states in the South Pacific, and I think we'll make some fairly short-term progress on that in the next couple of years. But the really big, if I had to, as Professor Bratsby's asked us to identify one priority, I would say implementation, implementation, implementation. I mean, the right is widely recognized. It's now a universal human right. And we just have to get on with the job of transforming it into reality for people across the world. And one of the other beautiful things about the right to a healthy environment, it really is a toolbox for all kinds of societal actors. It's a master key to unlock the door to environmental information, public participation, and access to justice. It's a hammer that can be used to knock down environmentally destructive projects, laws, regulations, policies, and activities. It's a shield that can be used to protect families, communities, and countries from environmental destruction. It's a saw that can be used to cut through environmental discrimination. It's a spark plug that can be used to trigger investment. Yeah, I'm stretching the metaphor here, but give me a minute. A spark plug that can be used to trigger investment in renewable energy, restorative agriculture, water and wastewater infrastructure. And getting this toolbox into the hands of people who can use it is really, for me, job number one. Because I think if we can get millions of people actively putting work into their right to a healthy environment around the world, we can do what we did with getting the right legally recognized. We can get it on the ground implemented.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You've given me my new video to assign this whole panel. We do want to make sure that the online participants get a chance. So Maria Lambert is going to briefly share the questions, and then if you could comment, whoever would like to briefly, and then we'll bring the panel to a close. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. So we have two questions. The first is, what is the feasibility of a third pact on environmental rights, such as the project proposed by the International Center for Comparative Environmental Law before the Human Rights Council? And the second question is proposed by Professor Ben Boer at the University of Sydney Law School. His question is, what new UN processes are now needed for the monitoring of the substantive legal implementation of the resolution across the world? Thank you.
Any brief responses anybody wants to offer?
I'm gonna take the first one if you want.
Okay, sure. I have an answer to the first question, which is we can't let the right to a healthy environment languish as a second-class right that's not recognized in a legally binding international instrument. So, I mean, I think that should be something that brilliant diplomats like Ambassador Chan work on in the coming years, is to get an international covenant on the right to a healthy environment, maybe throw the right to development in there and have a right to sustainable development that combines those two. But I think that, you know, that is part of the challenge as well.
So on the second question, on the monitoring kind of mechanism, so one answer would be to have a new treaty, because that treaty could set up a monitoring mechanism. But I also think that this is something that the United Nations has actually done a lot better job on than you might think. And in addition to having the special rapporteur, the mandate on human rights and the environment, there's now a committed mandate on climate change, for example. There already was a mandate on toxics. I think there's, just as importantly, vastly increased attention from all of the different special rapporteurs to environmental issues within their mandate, and the treaty bodies that already oversee different human rights treaties have all either said that there's an implied right to a healthy environment in their own treaties, or the ones that haven't said that nevertheless take on environmental cases now pretty routinely and apply the rights that they have. So when you add all that up together, we do have a fairly high degree of international kind of presence, I would say. I'm not saying that's enough or that more doesn't need to be done, but I do encourage you to kind of think of that when you're thinking about how the right is being implemented, to think of all the ways, all its different aspects, because there are often different bodies, different treaty bodies or other human rights experts that are focusing on various of those aspects. And that all adds up to quite a bit.
And if I could just add one thing to that, John, that's that increasingly at the Universal Periodic Review process carried out by the UN Human Rights Council, the right to a healthy environment is coming up. States like Costa Rica are asking other states, well, what have you done lately on the right to a healthy environment, which is fantastic. And also there's the Danish Institute for Human Rights is compiling a database of all of the instances where the right to a healthy environment is being reviewed as part of the Universal Periodic Review process. And there's also, just a shout out, I know we're at Pace University, I shouldn't be talking about New York University, but r2heinfo.com is an updated website that keeps track of the nations that have recognized this right in law and all of the new cases that are being brought specifically on the right to a healthy environment. So apologies to Pace, but collaboration, right?
Thank you. Ambassador Chan, anything you'd like to
They're
add?
the lawyers.
Well, all right. Well, before I ask Professor Robinson to come up and give some concluding remarks, I just want to say what an incredible privilege it's been to be in conversation with all of you. I had a smile on my face the entire time because this is the optimism. This is what we need. And I'll remind you all that almost exactly a year ago today, we were here bestowing the award on two incredible laureates for their tremendous efforts that led to the adoption of the BBNJ, or the High Seas Treaty. And come January, it will be going into force because enough states have ratified it that it will go into force, providing protection to biodiversity to a vast, vast region of the planet. More good news. I want to ask you all to please join me in thanking our incredible panel for their efforts, their work, their insights, and inspiration. Thanks. I now turn the floor to my distinguished colleague, Professor Nick Robinson, university professor and one of the founders of the PACE Environmental Law Program, and as Liliana Haub said, without whom none of us would be here today. Thank you.
An extraordinary moment. Thank you very much. For those of you who are on Zoom, I have the mic. It's an extraordinary moment to recognize our honorees and the ambassador with her extraordinary story about how the vote got adopted. When I was watching the General Assembly on Zoom that day, I was riveted to the screen and the presentation that Costa Rica led the General Assembly through. It was just the most wonderful example of successful diplomacy. But more than that, our award this evening is not just the award for our honorees, it's your award. The right to the environment isn't somebody else's right, it's your right. It's a human right. And if we don't, each one of us, take away from this awards ceremony tonight a commitment, as the last questions raise, to implement that right, then we ourselves have to call ourselves to account. The human right to the environment will become real when each one of us treats it as real. And that, I think, is the legacy of this evening. Thank you for this wonderful panel. Thank you to the university for this wonderful gathering, to the Haub family. Thank you to all of you for coming. And now we have a short reception in which you can continue this dialogue and ask all the questions that you didn't want to ask in public. Thank you.